do it for the next 5 months and then push it over there.
Sound good to me.
Won't bother me.
Don't bother me either.
I won't be offended. Just send it right to Pat or Sally. I don't care. Just keep it.
We don't have to vote on this, do we? All right.
Okay, so since it's 6 o'clock, Pastor Dan, would you give the invocation?
I'd like to read from Psalm 139 in the Passion Translation. It says here, Lord, you know everything there is to know about me. You perceive every movement of my heart and soul, and you understand my every thought before it even enters my mind. You are so intimately aware of me, Lord. You read my heart like an open book, and you know all the words I'm about to speak before I even start a sentence. You know every step I will take before my journey even begins. You've gone into my future to prepare the way, and in kindness you follow behind me to spare me from the harm of my past. With your hand of love upon my life, you impart a blessing to me. This is just too wonderful, deep, and incomprehensible. Your understanding of me brings wonder and strength. So this passage, I believe, gives so much of a bearing to understand the trust we can have in our God. Lord, I thank you that we can fully trust you with everything that we have in front of us. And Lord, that you are prospering each and every member of this council, every city worker, and that you are prospering this city to move forward in the very best way possible. So I thank you, Lord, that you are able to see us. You know everything about us. And we know that you so desire to give us of your wisdom. So we seek you tonight for your wisdom, for solutions in the areas of running this city. And so we know you, we trust you, we hand this completely into your very capable hands. And we choose tonight to move forward into new areas. And Lord, I just thank you, Lord, that you have your hand of protection over every officer, that you have your hand of protection over every family. And Lord, so we just pray that you would keep the safety of every citizen. And Lord, just as any person is ready to rise up or to do something incomprehensible, Lord, we just pray that they would stop and think before they act. And Lord, just that this would become a new way, a new culture, a new way of living here in this city. I pray this in Jesus' name.
Amen.
Thank you, Dan. We'll officially call the Committee of the Whole meeting to order. Madam Clerk, would you please take the roll?
Mayor Miller.
Here.
Alderpersons Clem.
Here.
McClanathan.
Here.
Ross.
Here.
Parker.
Here.
Busker.
Here.
Brashaw.
Here.
Keister is absent, and Berberet.
Here.
If you could please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance led by Alderman McClanathan.
I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And Alderman McClanathan, it's your meeting.
Thank you, Mayor. Next, we have approval of the agenda. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second. All right, moved by Alderperson Brashaw, seconded by Alderman Berberet. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion carries. Next item is approval of minutes from the Committee of the Whole meeting on February 11th, 2019. There's a motion to approve by Alderman Parker.
Second.
A second by Alderman Ross. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion to approve, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion carries. Public comments, there was nobody signed in on the public comments portion, so that takes us to item number 7, discussion of an ordinance amending Chapter 242, Fire Department of the Code of Ordinances of the City of Freeport to provide for a new Section 242.55 to establish charges for vehicle accidents, extrications, and fires, as presented by Fire Chief Allen.
Thank you, Alderman McClanathan. I want to introduce Lindsay Morris. She's from Andre's Medical Billing, so she's the one that handles our account for all the ambulance billing, as well as would handle the fire fee proposal. So We're going to go through the presentation. This is the same presentation that I gave the last time with a few tweaks here and there, but pretty much the same one, just so everybody gets refreshed on where we're at. And then at that point, we can answer any questions you might have about it. So if you remember, we proposed this fee for all vehicle accidents, for the car fires, and we did have structure fires in there. That was removed from this. So this is going to be handled by Andres Medical Billing. Anytime the fire department would respond to a car accident or extrication or a car fire, the fire department would have the ability to bill the at-fault or responsible party. This is built into the insurance policy for the vehicle owner's insurance, and there'd be no out-of-pocket expense to the person itself. So we would bill their insurance only, and then if there was any extra costs that the insurance didn't cover, we're not going to go after the person that's responsible out of pocket. So it'd just be the insurance company. Again, the focus is going to be on motor vehicle accidents and car fires only. We're not going to do the structure fires. And up top, it talks about a commission fee. Normally, the ambulance commission fee by Andres is a 6%, and we are at 20% just because there's a little bit more built in, but that's pretty standard. Again, how it works, if we respond to motor vehicle accident or car fire, so just some numbers so you can reference. This is 2018. Freeport Fire responded to 135 vehicle accidents, 6 vehicle extrications, and 8 vehicle fires. To put the numbers to that, the vehicle accidents would be around $487 per incident. An extrication is just over $1,400, and the vehicle fire is $677. So that would equate to about $70,000. We're going to use a conservative figure of about $60,000 going forward if this would pass, so that Randy would have some way and some ability to budget. But it's all going to be dependent on how many accidents we go on. We can't predict the future, so we don't know how many accidents or those type of incidents we're going to respond to. So we figured about $70,000 would equate with what 2018 number of incidents we responded to, but quite frankly, if we were going to be conservative, we'd say about $60,000. Andres, what would happen is they collect on 90% of properly documented incidents, and there's nothing in our documentation that would say that we couldn't pull the money out of that. So the documentation that our fire officers do would get sent out. There would be the fire department secretary would take care of making sure that all that information was done, would enter into the Andres system, similar to what we do with ambulance calls. And then the data is downloaded one time per month, and then a check is cut back to the city on the 7th of every month for the previous month. As it sits right now in Illinois, there's 104 plus fire departments that Andres bills for, although Andres doesn't have all the fire departments in the state, and there are other departments out there that are doing that, and you probably wish you did have them all. But there's 104 that are being billed as we speak. Again, this concept's becoming an industry standard, and the insurance policies already have these monies built in to the policies themselves. So by us not going out and grabbing this money, it's one less fee we're not grabbing that we probably should be. But it would require the passing of a city ordinance to enforce this. Again, soft billing process, no out-of-pocket for the owner. Only the responsible party is billed. Andres collects, handles the building. It's a new source of revenue for us, and we can conservative estimates, like I said, $63,000 to $72,000 a year, and we would recommend this. And one correction I want to make going forward, we had talked a little bit at the last time about the vehicle accident where the responsible party was injured and they were transported by EMS, by the ambulance service, and they would be billed for the health insurance. At that point, I didn't think that we could bill that party, but actually, since it's two separate insurance, there's the health insurance and the auto insurance, those are both billable, and that was a correction I needed to make so you all were aware of that. At this point, I'd like Lindsay just to talk a little bit about, I know there have been some questions about the auto owner's insurance and affecting premiums and some of the information that's out there, so if she could just speak on that real quick, and then we'll take some questions.
As a Chief said, this is already built into all of your motor vehicle policies. So it's essentially free money that's sitting out there. And like he had said, a lot of the fire departments in Illinois, it's kind of becoming a thing that they're looking for additional revenue sources. Unfortunately, with EMS billing, you're only going to get what you're going to get because of your payer mix. And so this is kind of like taking shape over the last few years. If you don't bill for these incidents, the insurance company is just keeping that money. So that's how they're getting rich. So as a policy holder, I'm paying for insurance to cover these types of things. So if I live in Cary, if Cary doesn't bill for it, if I'm the at-fault party, my State Farm insurance is just keeping that money. So it's there. And it's now, fire departments are recognizing this, that these are billable offenses, and you can make some money off of it.
So one of the things we've talked about as we go forward, I know a discussion was about the police department. So what we had talked about internally was this is a one way that we don't have regular capital funding for our police cars, and this is one way we can address the issue for funding those police cars as we go forward, is using the fees that the fire department's collecting for these accidents and putting them towards making sure our police vehicles are up to speed, up to snuff as we go forward, as well as do the standard split within them. But it would be that where we'd like to dedicate these funds to.
It does take some ownership on the fire departments because they have to write the narrative and create the scene from start to finish. So if it's a weak narrative, it's going to produce a weak outcome. So the department knows that in order to be paid for these incidents, to have this cost recovery option, they do have to produce a solid narrative, and they have to paint the picture from start to finish. So that is something that we're able to provide specific narratives, some examples, and some training does go into it on their part.
Alderman Clem?
I got a couple questions if I could. First of all, Chief Todd, do you guys go to every accident that there is, or just the ones that you're called for, that you're needed at if there's a fire?
There's criteria the dispatch has set up for vehicle accidents. So if it's a PI incident, personal injury, or an unknown, maybe it's an unknown personal injury, then fire's dispatched automatically. If the two parties call 911 and they say this happened, fender bender, the dispatcher will ask, do you think there's any injuries? They'll say no, and then it's just the police department's dispatched out with no fire. But if there's fluids on the ground, any entrapments, those are all fire department's going to respond. So I would say the majority of the car accidents that are done, fire department responds.
Okay, that was my next question, was what kind of percentage, of them? I mean, is it 80% you go to?
I don't have the police statistics. I just
That's
go off
okay.
of those were the numbers I was able to provide.
Okay. You mentioned that you guys handle the insurance for 104 different fire department, or not the insurance, excuse me, the payment process for 104 fire departments. Do all of them have this in their package that you bill for?
Currently, right now, we have 104, give or take. Currently, right now, we have 104 departments participating in the fire recovery, cost recovery model. For the EMS portion, it's over 200. So not everybody can or wants to use the fire recovery, the cost recovery model.
So I want to make sure that that's clear. You currently bill 200.
We are in 18 different states for EMS, and so the EMS portion is a separate than fire recovery. So we're the same but different, if that makes sense. So we have the EMS and then the fire recovery. So more fire departments participate in the EMS. It's been here for many years. It's a lot simpler. Everything is electronic. There's ICD-10 codes. There's codes that health insurance companies will recognize in electronic, whereas for the cost recovery, the fire portion of things, it's a vastly different. It's not electronic. We have to email, fax, send the ordinance, send the bill. It's constantly following up with these insurance companies. So that's why the 20%, it is higher than the EMS portion, because it's far more work that goes into it. And the fire department, it's real time. They can log into the hub. They can see every claim, where it's at, who's touched it, what calls have been made. So they're different animals.
Two more if I could.
Go ahead.
Okay, next one is, since you mentioned that, and you mentioned the process and what all it was, nobody's mentioned the process on how much it is for us to do. Is an officer gonna sit there 2 hours or every accident that he does doing paperwork? Or is it gonna be 3, or is it gonna be a half an hour? Or how long does somebody spend on doing this?
Typically with a fire report, all that information goes in and there's a narrative. If there's an EMS portion to it, there's a separate narrative for that. So to add the details in and kind of paint the picture, so when they extract that information out of the narrative, it would be minutes. It shouldn't be any more labor intensive or put the fire unit out of service at all. So it'd be a very simple process.
Okay, last one if I.
Go ahead.
The last one is, you mentioned that this is built into every policy. It possibly is built into every policy, but it's built into the medical portion of every policy, correct?
The EMS bill, the ambulance transport is built into the medical policy. This portion is just built into being able to drive liability.
I had an insurance person tell me that this comes out, a payment for that for extraction or something like that would come out of the medical end of your coverage, which is the least amount of coverage that most people have on a insurance. You know, like if you got 100,000, 50,000, then you got 20,000 for medical or something, and if that medical's used up in the rest of it, the funding sometimes wouldn't be there for that.
Yeah, so with the fire recovery, with motor vehicle accidents, you do have to submit that run to us. We pull them as soon as they're ready, because yes, once that policy is exhausted, it's exhausted. There's no more, and we don't go after, we don't balance bill the individual because it's highly unsuccessful. So it's built in there, but once it's exhausted, it's exhausted. So there is no deductibles. You don't want to sit on the claim. You need to be the first person to submit it to be paid.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Alderman Parker and then Busker.
I think you just answered it. So if somebody's got a piece of junk they're driving, they only have liability on it, and is that built into that?
The no, probably not.
Probably not. So if they don't have full coverage, it's not there.
Right, it's not there.
So would this go against the driver then, or that would be just dropped?
No, it would, you can write the ordinance as is, but it's going to be very unsuccessful trying to get that balance from a patient or an individual.
Or some slug that doesn't have insurance at all?
That, you're right, that too.
Okay. And you don't bill the party directly, you bill their insurance company, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Alderman Busker.
Yeah, with following up on Alderman Clem's question, you said this comes out of the medical, and once that's exhausted, it's exhausted. So, yeah, you guys, we wouldn't go after anybody else, but if there was another medical bill that came in, they could potentially go after that person on top of it. So what money comes to us would ultimately come out of their pocket because they have to pay some other bill with it, correct?
Well, if we're billing just strictly the insurance, like if they have a $10,000, once they've reached that $10,000 cap, there's no money to pay you, or us, I should say, so then it would essentially just get written off. I'm not sure how other types of, what?
Yeah, if there was another claim against the same policy from a healthcare provider, we couldn't answer that question for them. We can only answer for what Andres would.
So if we got paid first, there's another bill comes in, they're gonna get stuck with that bill,
It depends.
possibly.
Possibly, but if it's from like a hospital,
It would go, the hospital would first charge the health insurance policy. So when he says it's the health portion of the insurance, it's the health portion of your auto insurance, which,
Yes.
so, you know, that does not, so if you were transported to the hospital, the health insurance that you carry would,
Covers the ambulance transport.
covers the ambulance transport, covers the treatment in the hospital.
Alderman Ross.
Okay, there's another question that, in regards to Alderman Clem. Okay, will there be any, ask for manpower and additional forms? Will there be any, additional forms need to be filled out?
No. The software we currently have, the Firehouse software we use to do all documentation for fire and EMS responses, that would be the same software. So there's no upgrades to that, and it would all be in the narrative on that software. It's just more detail, and quite honestly, when our fire lieutenants do the documentation, it's much simpler process than the EMS side. The EMS documentation is very long, very detailed, paint a real good picture. So on the details on the fire side of it, much simpler typically, but all these fire officers have been paramedics. They know how to document, they know what needs to go in there, and just with a little bit of training, they'll be able to fit that in a timely manner.
Okay.
Mr. Chair,
Alderperson Brescia.
thank you. Based on our conversation with council before, I did contact my insurance company and had extensive conversations with the owner of our insurance company, plus he spoke to several underwriters. And in his personal opinion, he said it would be silly for us not to go after these funds. His opinion was that not everyone has full coverage that would possibly cover the cost of an accident, but if the accident was deemed serious enough to call the fire department, and it was billable, that it should be billed to insurance if possible, if a city entity could do that. Well, then of course I asked him, well, what about the premiums? Would they go up? And he goes, you got to remember, you already got in a serious accident. He goes, if it was you and you were in a serious enough accident to call the fire department and you were going to make a claim, this is small potatoes compared to what mostly is turned in. Usually those are injurious accidents. Usually a person's going to go to the hospital, have medical bills. The car is possibly incapacitated. You're going to need a rental. You might have to pay if you were at fault, because remember, this is for the at fault. You also are going to be responsible, us as an insurance company, to cover some of the costs of the other driver and their vehicle as well. And I quoted some of the prices. I don't have it in front of me right now. The costs per accident, like a vehicle accidents, is $500 per accident. It's $500 is a drop in the bucket compared to what we cover sometimes in an accident. If you're talking about, you know, ambulance rates and all the other stuff we're going to have to pay, the rental car. He went on and on about different things that his underwriters explained to him about that. He said not everybody's going to have that insurance. And it's going to be a roll of the dice. Are they going to sue people? And I said, no, as far as I understand, this is only coming from the insurance company. So there again, he reiterated his first comment was, you know, you'd be silly not to do this.
Well, he said that when you asked him specifically about the premiums, he said, well, you're already dealing with a large ticket. Did he specifically answer whether there's going to be a difference in what they do on the premiums if they charge, if it's a $10,000 claim versus now a $12,000 claim? Did he answer that, or did he just say, well, you're already dealing with a large situation, so it's going to cost you anyway?
Usually if it's a large sum, they'll raise your insurance rates anyhow. You've gotten yourself into something more than a fender bender if they've probably called the fire department. He said it's probably, you know, he can't do the magic ball thing and shake it and say it's going to be A or B. Because there again, if the fire department is called because they think somebody's hurt and then they turn up and nobody is and nobody takes that ambulance ride and it is just a fender bender, well, you're still going to have that fire department charge at that point, but it might only be $500. But there again, you have to probably get your car fixed anyhow, and you got to turn it into your insurance company. So,
would it be an accurate summary, just on this one portion? You mentioned a lot on it, and I realize I'm asking you to kind of speak for him, and that's not totally fair. But that said, would it be accurate for him to say, if he were in here, yes, it may have a marginal impact on your premiums, but in the circumstances that we're dealing with, it's going to already have a significant impact on your premium? Is that kind of a fair what he's saying?
That's what I supposed from what he told me.
I
But
can
there
only hold you
again,
to summary.
he kept I shouldn't say disqualifying what he said, but he just said everything is a case-by-case basis.
Sure.
Just like any claim we do. And he goes, and it also will depend on the documentation and whether it's documented also by the police department, if it was a serious accident, and we look at who is at fault here.
Thank
That's
you.
what I got on.
That's great.
Couple questions. What's the interaction with the department and Andre's billing? I mean, do they already handle some of your billing in regards to this, or is this uniquely to this subject?
So Andres handles all of our EMS billing, and since they offer the fire recovery portion of billing, that's how this conversation started, was through that mechanism.
And how do you guys get paid from this?
We get paid on what we collect.
Okay. So what's the percentage
For EMS or for fire,
for this proposal?
20% of what we collect.
Okay. How did these, go ahead, sorry.
This question may sound out of line, but it's looking at it at a different angle. Of the 104 districts or cities that you do, okay, do all of them bill primarily on every accident period? Do they bill on if the accident is involved in somebody from out of town? Is it involved in, is there any kind of separation there?
Districts, if you're a district, you can only do your non-residents. As a city or a village, you can do residents and non-residents. Most, because this is an insurance only, most of the 104 departments do resident and non-resident. I'd have to, maybe a few trickled in there, just do your non-resident, but
No, no, and my only thing where I'd come from on this and say, when you sent me a bill or sent my insurance company a bill for how much and I found out about it, and I'd say to you, what the hell am I paying these guys $24,365 for? They're supposed to be there to provide me service. Just a flip side, not anything yay or nay. You know, I supported to move it forward on one of the things we look at is that it does take and provide, even at the lowest figures you put out, okay, $24,000 towards police or fire or police car or something. You know, if you put it in that perspective, you know, you're going to get something out of here, and we're very restricted on where we can get new or any additional funding. So just something to think about. Thank you, Peter.
You mentioned that these are built into a lot of policies, but also in order for us to assess these fees, we have to pass an ordinance. How do these get put into place into policies prior to the ordinances being in place collecting the fees? How did this become mainstream in these policies? If this is something that requires an ordinance from us in order to collect it, how did these become mainstream in these insurance policies?
insurance policy, we don't sit at the table, they're there, I think that's above me.
I don't have an answer for you.
I don't have an answer for that.
On the estimated revenue, on your line with the old-fashioned car accident, page on that, you have estimated revenue, you said 88,000 and 20%. Is that 20% because of what you think we're not gonna collect, or is that 20% taking into account the fees of Andres?
The fees, correct.
Okay. I would note, I'm not sure where everyone's at in regards to this, but if the majority of the council is inclined to move this forward, I'd certainly like to, for my 2 cents, would like to see some limitation in the language to the ordinance that the reimbursement only be limited to the, what comes from the insurance company and not passed on to the extent that we can actually put that in ordinance.
You can.
Okay.
Chair,
Alderman Ross.
that 20%, is it flexible?
Unfortunately, from the powers that be above me, I've heard no. It's a 20% standard. I have not heard of it going anything else.
It's a straight across the board for every
Every department.
department.
Mhm.
if it's any consolation, and Lindsay can probably plug her ears, we have a really low rate for our EMS. It's negotiated down to 6%, while most departments are paying 7, 7.5, or the upwards of 8. So we do get a pretty good bargain on the EMS side of things, if that helps. But yeah, I've already asked that question of Lindsay, and it's pretty solid at that 20%. There's no give in that.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Alderperson Bradshaw.
this ordinance hasn't been put on the floor yet, has it?
No.
Has it been moved forward for a reading?
Just at the last committee of the whole.
Please refresh my memory.
So I thought it had not, but
There was a first reading.
there was a first reading.
So it was put back on the table for more discussion?
But we can all.
Please.
At the February 4, 2019 council meeting, Alderperson Keister made a motion to move ordinance 2019-11 to the committee of the whole meeting on March 11, 2019 for further discussion, seconded by Alderperson Clem.
But anything in here at this point could be modified.
That's correct. Since it
Amended
says
or-
it can be amended, any changes you need to make between first and second reading, we can make that. And we just note it, that we'll have to adopt the amendment prior to adopting the ordinance.
So, Chair?
Go ahead.
Thank you. So we don't have to make a motion to move this forward if it's already on the table for the next regularly scheduled council meeting. And at that council meeting then, before it possibly be voted on, somebody would make the amendment changes at that time?
So that's correct, and I have it down to restricted the amount collected to that which the insurance provides.
And I think the first part of your question was it already set to go?
Was it already
Yeah,
set to go?
We referred it
We
to
had a
the
first
committee, but
reading.
did it have a motion and a second on the first reading?
Yes.
I mean, it got sent here,
That's-
but before that.
We had a motion to put it to COW.
For further discussion is how I have it noted.
I don't,
Did it
I
ever
don't,
have a motion to approve, though? with
It does
regards-
not, no.
Okay,
so it hasn't
we
had a
need-
first reading.
We need to send it back then, if we're
So-
gonna do that.
Chair,
Yes.
I would like to make a motion to send this to the next regularly scheduled council meeting with the amendment suggested by yourself with the limitation of 20% of the collected amount put into that ordinance.
So 20% is the Andres fee.
Correct.
So the restricted, I thought, I'm not sure I understand what you're asking.
I meant with the limitation of Andre's fee into the ordinance. Isn't that what you requested, council?
I was referencing only making sure that it gets billed to the insurance and not then, any part that's not collected doesn't go then, and it gets assessed to the individuals, is what I was indicating.
That's what I meant.
Okay,
Thank you.
So that's what I've got written down, so.
okay. So there's a motion by Alderperson Bradshaw. And a second by Alderman Parker, and just for clarity, this will be, since there was not a motion to approve when it was on first reading, it will still be on first reading.
This will be first reading
Okay.
on the
Okay.
18th.
Alderman Clem, discussion.
Yes. I guess the important thing here would be, if anybody's got any of the stuff that we discussed, like, should it be just for people from out of Freeport? Should we not do it? Just so we don't end up on the council trying to amend something 3-4 times. That's my only concern. You know, so if you've got any concerns or anything you'd really like to know beforehand, I would say to you, give it to Lowell, because then we would go to the first reading and then on. It would give you a little while down the road to make sure everybody was on the same page, that they wanted it or didn't want it or were comfortable with it. So I'll shut up.
No, that's a good one. Madam Clerk,
Chair, I missed the second.
Alderman Parker, I believe. Correct? Yes. You seconded it? Yep, okay. Alderman Ross.
Yes. This would be both for resident and non-residents?
Correct.
Alderman Clem?
No, I was just gonna say, as it lies now, if you've got a feeling you'd like to just have it from people from out of town, that's the kind of stuff we need to tell Lowell.
Any further discussion on the motion to refer it back to the next regularly scheduled council meeting for first reading? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion carries. Thank you. Thank you. Item number 8 is presentation regarding the compliance engine software, driving life safety by tracking code compliance with Brycer LLC, presented by Fire Chief Allen.
Okay, thank you, Alderman McClanathan. Okay. So bear with me on this one. I had a lot of questions when I went into this too. This was brought to me by Deputy Chief Seneff, and what spurred this discussion was the fact that he was looking at software so that we could do our company inspection program. If you remember, this was the company inspection program we ramped up last year. We were able to increase our commercial business inspections at a high rate. So in that, he was looking for some tracking software. What can we do better? How can we use technology to assist with what we're doing? The costs started coming back, and they're $35,000, they're $70,000. Very robust system, but in that, we don't have money for this kind of thing. So he continued to kind of research that. What can we, especially focusing on, and we'll talk about it in here, is fire protection systems. Those fire protection systems, they're the sprinkler heads, they're hood systems in commercial restaurants. They're all those items that prevent a fire, that are written into our ordinances, that we have to provide, that the residents or the commercial businesses have to provide under the International Fire Code, which we've adopted. So let me just take you through this, and then I'm going to wrap it back around so you understand how it affects Freeport. So Brycer, the compliance engine, is the name of the company. And it's a web-based service. It's built to ensure safety for firefighters, taxpayers, tourists, and the community. And it collects and organizes and categorizes third-party inspection reports. So what we're gonna try to focus on is all the false alarms that we get. There's a lot of systems out there that aren't necessarily maintained. Fire department goes out and inspects buildings, but we're looking for, is the address posted on the outside? Is there a gas can sitting next to the water heater? How are the exits blocked? Is it cluttered? And we're going to look at some details, whether or not it has a sprinkler system, yes or no. But how is it maintained? Well, that gets to be a little bit more task involved. And even though we have a fire inspector and he's managing a program, to get into the details of writing every company and saying, hey, I think you're past due here, it's just very labor intensive. So we're trying to streamline that so that we can use the manpower that we have to make sure that these systems are maintained, which protects all of us. It protects your firefighters, it protects the buildings and the infrastructure that we have. There's going to be follow-up phone calls. All of these are going to be handled by Brycer. Provides detailed analytics, which we'll be able to have a screen that when the fire inspector, Deputy Chief Seneff wants to come in and look at the town, it'll show who's compliant, who's not, and what stage that business would be in for compliance. And again, it provides third-party inspection companies to pay the fee for submitted reports, and I'll get into that, so it'll hopefully make sense. This is the software. So when Deputy Chief Seneff comes into the office in the morning, he says, you know, I want to see where our businesses are on Galena. He can use this to navigate, go in there to see, you know, a specific business and where they're at in the compliance process. So again, it says commercial premises are legally required to maintain, and it gives a lot of different areas, and it gets into generators. Now, all of these, we're going to concentrate on just a few of these items, and we're going to concentrate on commercial hood systems, fire alarm systems, fire sprinkler systems, and standpipes are going to be the only ones that we're going to focus on out of there. But 40% of the life safety systems are not inspected or serviced every year, even though in our ordinances, we've adopted the International Fire Code, and we've adopted and said that our businesses have to comply. We're just having trouble making sure that they are compliant. $2.6 million is an estimate that they say that false alarms cost the fire service in the U.S. in 2016. 32.5% is due to lack of maintenance and testing, and it's $500 plus call for a false alarm, and that's just what they estimate goes to cost for a response. This is done all over. It was started in the Chicago area, and they've branched out all over the place. I get emails on a daily basis for cities that are now adopting the compliance engine. These are just some statistics, and this one is just talking about deficiencies in the Raleigh, North Carolina area, and how they were able to close those deficiencies using this system. Los Angeles is reducing their past due compliance by quite a bit. But this next slide, I think, is real important, and this is Austin, Texas. So this is a 4-year sample. If you look at the bottom line there, it's 4 years, and the 4% is what Austin Fire Department was going to try to handle this in-house, and they were going to attempt to do this on their own. They're going to send out the notifications. They're going to make sure that they handle it all, and they could only get a success rate up to 11%. And after that, they gave in. They said, we're going to go with the Brycer compliance engine, and they boosted their compliance to 47% in the next year. So the pricing model. Freeport Fire will focus on specific fire prevention systems, the automatic alarms, automatic sprinkler systems, standpipe system, and commercial kitchen hood systems. It's $15 per notification, but the business owner doesn't pay that. We certainly don't pay that. It's the third-party vendor. It's going to be your Ahern Fire Protection, your Company One, your Dubuque Fire Systems, all those private businesses that are in the business to maintain these systems. They're the ones that will pay Brycer by ordinance the $15 notification payment. And with that, what do they get in return? They get all the information that these systems exist out there. Because even with them, they don't know that these systems exist. If they're forced to be in compliance, then it's better for the third-party vendor because now they have more business for themselves because they need to get into these buildings. So that's where this all hinges off of, is how they get paid is through that third-party vendor. No cost to city, no cost to department, no cost to the business. The fee is paid by the third-party vendor, which, as I said, they're getting a benefit out of this as well. There's no expensive tracking software. Again, back to that $35,000, we don't have to pay for that. The city already has adopted the ICC and the IFC standards, holds the owners of the systems accountable to the adopted standards, and it drives compliance. And also, it would have an effect on our ISO rating. The last time ISO was here, there was a few areas that we deemed that we needed to focus on to improve our rating, and this was one of the areas. Brycer handles all the notifications, so we don't have to do those internally when the inspections are due. So they would put out notices at various times to say, Acme business, your commercial hood is due in 45 days. You need to notify whoever your vendor is to make sure that you get that done. And then they're going to follow up with it. But that's nothing that the city has to do. That's what Brycer handles. The vendor then sends a verification of inspection to Brycer, whether it's compliant or not, and it'd be ordinance driven. Brycer sends the inspection information to the Freeport Fire Department. That's how we have it on that software program that they provide, which is available at our fingertips. And then Brycer handles all the letters to the businesses for compliance, which has our discretion. We see the letter before it goes, so they're not going to use our name in vain, let's say, and say something in that letter that we don't want, that maybe not the message that we want out there. And then we set the timeline for compliance. So again, once this business, maybe it's a business that's struggling a little bit, but they're not compliant, doesn't mean we're going to hold fast and we're going to shut them down. It just means what do we have to do to get this system operational so that it's safe? Questions?
Chair.
Alderperson Bradshaw and then Alderman Ross.
Thank you. Chief, if I understand this correctly, this is basically false calls where, say, a hood sets off a fire alarm in a restaurant and the fire department rushes out there only to find that it's deficient, that they didn't set off a fire alarm, it just went off because of something with the hood. Is that correct?
Yeah, that would solve one of the problems. There's the response side, and then there's just the static systems that exist in the city today, and how do we know that the business owner is maintaining that. And so it's gonna prevent all those responses, but we're kinda doing it in a preventative and getting out in front of it, if that makes sense.
Follow up?
Go ahead.
So if I'm at the Wagner house and the fire department comes rushing in again because their hood alarm went off, you will help them, or this company will help them determine whether it's them at fault or their hood at fault?
It should be done ahead of time. If they have record that that system exists at the Wagner House, and they're having it inspected on an annual basis like they're supposed to according to the International Fire Code, which we've adopted, then certainly it should prevent those problematic systems that we respond to.
So if it was, I'm sorry, follow up?
Go ahead.
So if it was Wagner's, I'm using them as an example, but if it was their fault, they would then have to repair their system or?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Alderman Ross and then Alderman Burberry.
Okay, Chief Allen, okay, no, I know every year my fire extinguisher, gets serviced or checked out, once a year in May. But the Ansel system, the hood system, now, who, before Brycer, who was doing it before?
Whoever the business owner preferred to have.
Okay, not the fire department or anyone like that?
No. So if we came in and we did an inspection, we might see a tag, but then there becomes the enforcement. So the letters that are written, the follow-up, all those things that we're, again, trying to get out ahead and allowing this system do it so it's at our fingertips instead of all the legwork to try to continue to follow up on these things after over and over and over.
So does Bryce follow up? Excuse me.
Go ahead.
Does Brycer, do they test the system to make sure it does work or not, or what?
The third-party vendor does. So, for example, if you had a sprinkler system in your glass company, it would be up to you to contact your local vendor. And that may be Company One out of Rockford. It could be Dubuque Fire Systems out of Dubuque, whoever you prefer. But maybe I don't feel like doing it this year. And maybe the fire department catches it when they come in, maybe they don't. Who holds them accountable? Well, if Brycer knows that system exists, you're gonna get a letter 45 days before it's due. So then if you've had your inspection, then you say, hey, I'm compliant, here was the information, and it goes back to Brycer, and you're all good. If not, then you have to contact your third-party vendor to make sure that it's taken care of, it's inspected. You pay the fee to the third-party vendor, and then the vendor itself pays Brycer the $15 to make sure the paperwork is all sent through. The inspection that should have been done already.
Okay, I have to ask, it's mandatory to have this checked and working properly every year or every 2 years or what?
Every year.
Every year, once
Yes.
a year, because I know they do my fire extinguisher.
Right.
Okay, thank you, though.
Alderman Burberry.
Thank you. Chief, Freeport's going to focus on 4 areas into this program.
Correct.
You identified. How many installations, how many commercial businesses today exist in this town that are covered by those, roughly?
We have roughly 1,200 to 1,400 commercial businesses and fire protection systems. I don't have those numbers in front of me, but it would have to be at least 25% of those businesses. If it's a restaurant, the restaurants are going to be every time. If it's a business, or this isn't a business, but we have to have these inspected. You have a sprinkler system, or you have a standpipe system in a hallway that services a 3-4 story building. All those.
And a follow-up, please?
Go ahead.
The other areas that were identified further on in the presentation, further up in the presentation, that are not these 4, how will those be viewed, maintained, certified, come into compliance? Will the department continue to do it on its own, or?
A lot of those don't fall under, generators don't fall under the fire department, elevators don't fall under the fire department. Those are outside our scope typically. It's something we certainly could work with the building department. If this works on a trial basis, then maybe it's something we reach out and talk about.
And I'm not even sure Ben's certified to inspect, because I know we have to, for like elevators, we have to, the city hires an outside inspector to come in once a year and inspect our elevator. He is certified to inspect boilers.
Yeah, he does HVAC inspections.
Okay, thank you.
Alderman Clem.
A couple if I could. First thing, I think we're this would really be advantageous to the fire department is the fact that most of the businesses that are required to do this don't pay a lot of attention to it. You'd stop and take a look at, you'd be talking about every restaurant in town, you'd be talking about many taverns that serve food in town. And it is not only a safety factor, it's also a health thing that would throw up a red flag that way that everybody would be done at one time. Art mentioned the fire extinguishers. Is there any way, because most of these systems, some of these systems and stuff are tied into backflow preventers, can that come under your thing? Because you've got them on sprinklers. You know, they've got to be, if you got a boiler, you got to have a backflow preventer, you know, anything with water. So could that or would that be tied in anyway? Just a question.
You know, we've never inspected the backflow preventers. Typically, that's more on the plumbing side of it. And so the certifications that would entail our personnel getting that would be fairly difficult.
You know, Tom looks like he's going to speak, but I know once a year when we had one at church, we used to get a letter that, you know, your backflow preventer is due for inspection.
Do you have anything to add, Director? No, I just want to confirm that that's correct. Alderman Busker?
Yeah, not sure where to begin. I guess more or less I'd like to sit down with Deputy Chief Seneff and kind of discuss this, because there's a lot of questions that I don't want to bother here tonight. But is this just, if an alarm comes up, they're going to flag it and then the department goes in and inspects this? Or not sure where this is, because I know a private organization I belong to, we have a fire alarm company that comes in quarterly and inspects our facility, and they give us a pretty good bill for that. So I'm just curious how, I guess I have more questions for that, if you could kind of open it up a little more.
Yeah, the interface, maybe, is that the direction you're going? How do they interface to know what systems out there? How do we know what systems exist? Some of it's going to be out of our database. A lot of it is going to come from Brycer's information that they're able to pull from certain data they get from different companies to identify, you know, Freeport, Illinois, we found 3 businesses in this area. Now we're going to add it into our system. It could be when we're out on inspections that Deputy Chief Seneff would cross-reference to make sure, hey, I think we missed one in here. So it'll build the data as we go, but it just ensures, you know, that the people out there that have these systems that are supposed to be keeping them compliant do so.
So one thing I'll add is both, I know Chief, they preach this a year, and they preach this at my national conference too. The biggest way to stop fires and the biggest way to make sure that is to ensure that people are meeting and are code compliant with these type of firefighting equipment that's in businesses. The figures are astronomical if we're enforcing this and making sure that it's meeting codes.
And we're not adding anything to the business owners. This is just what they're supposed to be doing anyway. So if there was somebody out there that is going to complain that this cost me X number this year, well, it's supposed to cost you X number every year to maintain that system by the codes the city has already adopted.
And along those lines, Chief, realistically, as you've said multiple times, but just reiterate again, everything in this is already required by code. So theoretically, if you were handling it internally, you'd have 4, 5, 6 inspectors who were their job and responsibility was to go around and be checking on these, and that's the type of level it would take for you to maintain this on your own outside of having a database of this nature.
Correct, because the inspections we do, and we already utilize our fire companies to handle a lot of the inspections. It's hard to get in depth with the amount of runs that we currently, emergent calls that we have to go on to create a 2-page list of things. We're trying to hit the highest area hazards that we can during those inspections. But a lot of stuff, if they may not see that, hey, there was a hood in this back kitchen, things get missed, and then we have to follow up. So yeah, we can handle where we're at now with the company inspections and having Deputy Chief Seneff in charge of the fire inspection program, but this data just adds to the amount of work that we can get and the information that we can collect.
This allows you to have a more thorough and comprehensive review of items that are already supposed to be in compliance than you'd be able to just by utilizing another party to create that database for you, and then they will interact with you, and you have that information available at any time.
Exactly right.
Yeah. Alderman Clem.
The other thing for follow-up, main thing when you're checking the halon systems and that kind of stuff, or throwing that red flag up, the big thing you're throwing the red flag up on also is cleaning the hoods and properly having them, all the ductwork done right and that everything works. That's the major thing. So you're 100% correct on the fires that you mentioned, Manager Crow, and when you get a grease fire going right now.
It's what happened with Maria, is they got a grease fire going and it was fully engulfed.
Chair.
Alderperson Brescia.
Thank you. Chief, on here, under the current cost, false fire alarms, they said the cost to respond to a false call averages $500 plus. At this time, I guess I have a couple questions. Is that approximate cost to our fire department when they answer a false call? And then my second part of the question is, do we bill those businesses for those false calls at this time?
Those are Brycer numbers, and you have to remember Chicago's represented, LA's represented. So those costs for us to roll a fire engine out with the personnel, we roll it out, it's going to be much lower cost, but it's just a representation. I think that we need to keep mindful that every time an engine rolls out the door, there's costs attached, there's maintenance, there's every time that we turn that engine over to roll out the door. And no, we don't bill for false alarms at this point.
Thank you.
Make a motion to move it forward?
Is there one?
Yes.
There's a motion to move it forward to the next council meeting made by, what's that? Made by Alderman Clem. Manager Crow?
I think, was there a second?
I was seconding.
Okay,
So
second
then what,
by Alderman
because this will
Busker.
be an agreement, what we'll have to do is draft, I'll get with Aaron, we'll have to draft an ordinance to adopt this to go forward, so.
We may or may not be ready by, well, see, it's next, we're at the
yeah,
council next
how
week.
quickly I can get
Might need it in April.
Aaron to turn it around here, so.
Okay, so, at the next, the next convenient, it's gonna either be this next week or it's gonna be the 1st of April, correct?
Right, because we'll need to get a contract from them as well.
Yeah, that's correct. And there's some sample ordinance language too that Aaron can provide in.
We'll let the fuzzy date slide, right, Attorney Cox? Okay.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
one thing in the meantime, is there like a demo model of like kind of a sample to see how the program works on a computer?
And Deputy Chief Seneff has this dialed in, so he would be the contact person for this. He can give you a demo, I think, on his computer. He kind of ran through the whole thing for me to kind of get me prepped for this, so he'd be the one to contact for sure.
Thank you.
Any further questions? So we have a motion and a second. No further discussion. All in favor of that motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, motion carries. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
Item number 9, discussion regarding an ordinance modifying a redevelopment agreement with Sega Manufacturing presented by City Manager Crow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So what we have currently is we have a redevelopment agreement with Sega Manufacturing, which was created in 2003. How it was created was Sega had been approached by the city to pay for the creation of the Lamb Road TIF, which is, we briefed earlier, is the most profitable TIF for us. And when they created it, they initially had created it with the understanding, working through the agreements, that they could do both TIF and enterprise money out of the same, when they had talked to, and I had different draft agreements that show that when they, for both TIF and enterprise zone, well, there was already an enterprise zone, he was getting an enterprise zone benefit. So once you receive an enterprise zone, you're not supposed to receive benefits from the TIF. That's a state law. So working with the county, the city went ahead and split, in the county, split the parcels. So the new building, which he was going to receive the money off of, was in one parcel, and then the other parcel was the enterprise zone, the original parcel that he was getting enterprise zone money. The enterprise zone, and it did create increment at that time. The enterprise zone was expired in 2011, and the properties were recombined. The owner of Sega Manufacturing was not, when I discussed with him, he was not aware that the property was going to be recombined, and did not realize that the increment was based upon the combined properties, value of the properties. However, when he saw his tax bill go up, he did protest the taxes because he thought that was what was going on with the enterprise zone, with his property tax having to be come back on. So he thought he was protesting one parcel at that point. And then at that point, in 2013, it dropped below increment for what he was supposed to. So the properties were recombined in 2011. He protested in late 2012. 2013, it dropped below increment. And since then, as per the agreement, we've been giving him a letter. He had approached a couple of members of the council, as well as myself, about the possibility, since he was paid for the creation of the TIF, to rewrite the agreement so that we have outstanding payment to him of, I believe it's $107,000, Randy, on this, on the agreement going forward. We are allowed, normally, we are allowed to take increment from the whole TIF and pay any particular redevelopment agreement as long as it stays contiguous to this. So because he created this, was responsible for the creation and paying for it, the city did not have the money to pay for the creation of this TIF. He paid for both the legal fees as well as the research, with the understanding he would receive it. One of our recommendations going forward, working with Aaron, and Aaron's Attorney Zito has talked to Attorney Cox about some of this so that we didn't have to pay 2 legal fees tonight here. But one of our recommendations is go ahead and change the RDA so we are paying the increment fully out of the complete TIF. And with that, I am standing by for questions.
Chair?
Mr. Chair.
Alderperson Bradshaw.
Thank you. How much did this company, Sega, pay for the creation of the Lamb Road TIF in the beginning? Were they responsible for any of those costs for themselves, or did they pay the entirety of the costs themselves on their own free will?
They were approached by the city to pay the cost, the legal fees and the creation and basically the work to create this. That amount was, from the agreements and from the information I have, did total around $47,000.
Further?
Go ahead.
Follow up, thank you. And did we have that in writing, that they would do that?
We do.
Okay. That's all I have for now.
Alderman Clement.
Now, I want to get this straight. We've got a parcel of land here that somebody owned that they split to take advantage of getting enterprise zone money.
So they did not split it.
But it got split so they could get enterprise money, right?
No, it was, here's what happened. was the property was originally in the enterprise zone, and he was getting enterprise zone benefits.
And TIF.
No, well, and the city approached him about paying for the creation of the Lamb Road TIF, with the understanding that his second addition would be paid, he would get an increment paid for it based upon the TIF. So then the city approached the county, because we're not allowed to take both you cannot take both enterprise zone money and TIF money out of the same property. So what they did was they divided the two properties, and it was the city and the county, divided the two properties. So they were receiving, one property was receiving TIF and one was receiving enterprise zone money. And when they were brought back together prior to the protest, they were brought back together. And at that time, he protested his taxes after they were brought back together.
Okay, so back to where we were. We split the parcel. We meaning somebody. Don't care who it is.
It's the city. I have proof that it's the city. Yes.
To his benefit.
To the homeowners, to the business owner's benefit, that's correct.
Correct. Then it got put back together by somebody, whoever the somebody is, okay? And then he hired 2 lawyers to come over and fight his taxes. And he fought his taxes and won. So meanwhile, the increment did not go up as it was supposed to be. And now he turns around and wants money back. Am I missing something? Please tell me if I am.
No, you're not.
Thank you.
Going back to the creation of this, on any of our other TIFs, did we have a private entity pay the legal cost and the creation costs of a TIF?
Not that I'm aware of.
Who was responsible for it in the other entities?
The city.
Okay. So, but in this circumstance, we decided to have a private entity do it.
That's correct.
And was he paid back out of the increment for that?
He was being paid back through the redevelopment agreement. The redevelopment agreement was for $197,000, and he's received approximately $90,000 out of that.
In all our other TIF agreements, do we have provisions to prevent a scenario like this from taking place, such as you can't protest your taxes or where the increment's going to come out of?
We do now. Okay. That was not a standard practice within the city previously. Prior to myself and Aaron getting here.
Okay.
Chair.
Go ahead, Alderperson Brycer.
Thank you. Manager Crow, what do our attorneys say about this? How do they feel about this repayment plan that was not carried through by the city? And why wasn't it addressed sooner to our attention?
Well, we were following the redevelopment agreement, which says if the city increment is not made, the city will file a letter with SEGA saying that we owe you back money for this and we'll be paid once increment is created. So basically, SEGA has a yearly IOU from the city to go forward with this. So if he ever created increment, we would pay those IOUs. And that was being followed. Previous community development directors filed those letters with SEGA, and we have copies of those. So the attorneys said, Aaron, ignorance, as Aaron said, ignorance is not a defense here, but he does admit that there are 2 ways that we do, in the RDA, we do owe, he's getting IOUs from us, and he also said that, yep, he paid for the creation of the TIF.
Follow up.
Go ahead.
So how much do we owe him total? What is he asking for again?
He's asking for us to pay off the back IOUs and go forward to about $107,000.
$107,000. One more follow-up?
Go ahead.
And is that how much the attorney feels is what is actually owed, or is this just something that this
No,
person is asking?
this is actually what's owed by the RDA, by the redevelopment agreement.
Manager Crowe, if I may follow up on that, those are the, pursuant to the RDA, was a combination of the reimbursable expenses, including the legal fees and the creation fees?
That was included in, that included the legal fees, and so the whole RDA said they would get 197,000 out of the amount, out of the increment. So the legal fees and the formation of the TIF, which was right around 40,000, were included in that.
Alderman Clem?
Sure. First of all, I think one of the things we should see is the documentation on it. Right now, we're dealing with, right here it says discussion of redistricting or whatever here. It's up a notch, I guess. But it sounds like a totally bad situation that has rendered itself every few years. And we're in the blessing of having it this time. I discussed this a very few minutes ago with Ron Kane, the county assessor. I think somebody ought to show us exactly the paperwork that's owed and what the plan is to move forward if there's money owed and so on and so forth. To pay out funds somewhat, no, I won't use the term, somewhat arbitrarily, to throw out a figure and say, yeah, we ought to pay that, I don't think is the thing to do, especially in the time that he protested his taxes and paid less taxes. If we owe him money, we owe him money, okay? I'm not saying we don't owe him anything. But if this looks fishy, it looks fishy. Let's just get the paperwork out and take a look at it. I mean, we can move it forward. We got 2 more meetings we can do this on, and it's not a problem whatsoever. But the way it is right at the moment, it leaves just a little bit to be desired.
Yeah, Manager Crowe, it would be feasible for the council to be able to review the documentation going back to 2003, correct?
Yep, I have a complete
You got a
folder of
big folder on that. If you could work on what's the most convenient way to
I can
present that.
I can
So-
send it out to, send all of you out here, including I have the documentation from Ron Kane, that Ron Kane forwarded to me, that showed that that it was a single parcel and then split into separate parcels. I also have, I actually have an IOU letter here from George Gallrap going forward, that says that after the first protest that he didn't have increment, and I've got the RDAs along with the previous payments. I also have a series of emails from Linda Buss as we go forward, so.
No, I appreciate it. It seems like on its face, this is a scenario where, and isn't it true with your documentation? It took the city a couple versions to kind of get the final paperwork in order as to what we wanted.
There were 4 different versions.
4 different versions. So it seems on its face, and I think we should take time and kind of get it to where we're all satisfied one way or the other. It sounds like from the representation from Manager Crowe that we were looking to establish a TIF that we've done very well with. We asked an individual to upfront the cost for us because probably some version of, hey, the city's got a tough budget, you know, and so eventually it got implemented. And it also sounds like it may be one of those situations where, well, we're just gonna have to see. I mean, if it's one of those situations where it's, is this legally cut one way or the other? That makes it simple. If it's not legally cut one way or the other, what's the equitable solution in regards to that? And looking at all the documentation, I think will help us figure that out. But Alderman Burberry had a comment.
Thank you. City Manager, what other businesses are in that Lamb Road besides Sega and TriStar.
So we have TriStar Metals, Sega, the Menards, Walmart, all of the strip malls that are within the Menards complex as we go. And I would have to look, because I know Snack King is not, because we looked at it.
And I'll-
Go ahead.
what we might or might not do here, like your concept about what's black and white or what's equitable, would what we do here affect any future options down in that neighborhood for future businesses?
No, we have the money to cover this within the current bank account and the TIF, if we were to pay it out.
I think along the lines also with Alderman Burberry's comment though is, are there other RDAs that are similarly situated in how they were structured as to who pays what and under what circumstances? Or have we eliminated that issue going forward by how we put together RDAs?
So this is the only RDA that was set up this way
Okay.
currently within this TIF.
Okay.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Question for you. Is there one RDA for both segments of Sega? One for the first and one for the second, or is it all the same one?
There is not, we have not been able to locate the RDA. I asked Ron Kane, because he was the enterprise zone administrator, and he does not have we do not have a copy for the enterprise zone. We've looked through our records, and he does not either.
Okay.
The enterprise zone, I do know, was established first.
Go ahead.
And this is just if you check, please. It's not, hey, I want to see this for sure. Would you check on Walmart and Menards of who paid the legal fees on that starting out and everything?
Certainly.
Okay.
I guess the RDAs were written with our attorneys, but the TIF was already established. So I guess I'm not sure I understand what you're asking.
I guess if what I was asking for basically is if Walmart and Menards paid a bunch of money up front on any of their stuff, and it looks like the development of the TIF was done by him, by Sega. Okay. But would there have been anything else that they'd have needed in that at that time?
So the RDAs are only, what happens is the only legal fees that's involved in the RDA is the drafting of the RDA by the attorneys.
No, okay. That would get further into the Walmart stuff, because I know there were things that they did and things that they didn't do and things that we did and things we didn't do, so that might be opening up a bag of worms, but I was just checking because of the comment of he paid to start the TIF, okay, but did they pay monies up front for a whole bunch of stuff would be my other question, and we can talk on that. That's not it's not a crisis either way. I understand.
Mr. Chair.
Alderperson Brescia.
Thank you. Going back to the agenda, Manager Crowe, this is number 9. It says discussion regarding an ordinance modifying a redevelopment agreement.
Yes.
So we don't have the redevelopment agreement in front of us, obviously. So to modify it, they just want to be paid back.
So every redevelopment agreement has to be adopted by ordinance as we go forward. So we negotiate it, and then it's adopted by ordinance. And so any modification to that redevelopment agreement has to be a modification to that ordinance.
Follow up?
Go ahead.
Usually we have that agreement in front of us, so we see what we're modifying. That's why it's a little obscure here, and there wasn't anything to click on the agenda, so we had no prior knowledge of what to do here.
That was my fault.
No, that's okay. I just want the listening public to know too why it's a little confusing for us when we're not even sure how we're addressing this.
So the council's aware, it took me working with it took me 4 attempts to get the right RDA.
So
It actually took the city 4 attempts to pass the right RDA.
Follow up?
Go ahead.
Just a comment. So we're not the only ones confused here. Thank you, sir.
15 years before your time, All right, so I think it would be probably appropriate to make a motion to refer this to the next committee of the whole meeting. It should give us time to have everybody, review the documents and bring it back for discussion on the ordinance. Or Manager Crowe, do you have a different recommendation?
I will, I want to you want to bring it back to the next committee of the whole, and as we go forward.
I don't think we're ready for a first reading.
Yep.
On a proposed ordinance, so.
I can get it, and I can get everything out to you.
Okay,
Rather than create a crisis.
sure. So I make a motion to move it to the April committee of the whole meeting.
Second.
And seconded by Alderman Busker. Any further discussion? All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, the motion carries. Thank you. Item number 10, discussion regarding infrastructure bonds, presented by City Manager Crowe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So as we've been discussing throughout several times, I wanted to update the council on where we are with the infrastructure bonds. We did our due diligence call here with Barrett and conference call with S&P. We should be getting our rating Thursday for this. And then on the April 1st, we're actually, that rating will allow them to go out. And I gave you the copy of the draft statement. This has been updated. We're supposed to be receiving the brand new statement here based upon some changes that we made and Baird made. We changed some of the growth we've seen in the city, some of our larger employers. Baird made some changes within it. And we'll see that this next week. I am hoping to actually maybe have it in time to give it to you at the council meeting. I don't know if I will. And then we will get the draft ordinance the following week. That ordinance will be based upon what the sale price is. We're expecting 2.72 million, this is the money that we're going to be used for infrastructure roads. On the April 1st, we will have to pass that ordinance. Again, we have to do a 72-hour notification prior, so we'll send out the agenda Friday, which meets the 72-hour requirements, and then we'll do a first reading and then waive the rules to go to a second reading for this on the same day. And that will lock in, we have to do that so we can lock in the price that is being sold, the bond has been negotiated and sold at.
Just as a reminder, I know we discussed this back when we made the adjustment, but because of the advantageous increase in the amount of loan forgiveness on some of our projects, specifically up to $2 million a year, having 75% loan forgiveness on some of the water and sewer projects. We took the last $8 increase that's coming and put a portion of it, $2, towards the roads. Now, instead of waiting every year for that $2 amount to come on in and be able to Dennis can only do a little bit with that amount, we're leveraging that for a bond that's payable over the 15 years to jumpstart and infuse some of our road work, which is resulting in the approximately 2.8, but once all the fees and everything are taken into account, maybe $2.72 million worth of work. Correct. So that we can jumpstart some of our road projects, correct?
That's correct. And that $2 fee is generating approximately, we made the estimate of $240,000 a year. So that's where the cost is.
And that you were seeing for Woodside, Wild Oats, Cleveland, and some of the other roads that went into.
I'm going to turn. I can't remember off the top of the head, but
Wheatland, Country, Dirk, Meadows, and Rosenteal. I think that's the other one.
Which one?
Burley Ridge.
Close to there, but not some of those. I'm sure my constituents wouldn't mind that.
Are there any other questions on that?
And you're going to bring it back to us, and just so everybody's clear, on the next time it's in front of us on an actual meeting, you're going to be asking for us to suspend the rules and approve it, and it's going to be in substance similar to what we're seeing here, just the
That's-
final figures are going to be locked in.
The final figures, this is strictly the draft we have here in front of us.
Sure.
The final figures will actually be locked in.
Is there a motion to refer this to the next, not the next, the
April will
April
be the
1st?
April 1st.
Council meeting?
So moved.
So moved by Alderman Clem, seconded by Alderperson Bradshaw. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion carries. Thank you, Manager Crowe. Finally, about 8 minutes left for no, just kidding, Attorney Cox. Discussion regarding amendments to the liquor code, presented by City Legal Counsel Steve Cox and Manager Crowe. Thanks, Steve.
Good evening. I will try to keep this short. You've got a couple of fairly beefy-looking ordinances in front of you, but the reason for that is there's simply a lot of small corrections to a lot of pieces of this. So, by way of background, I'm sure all of you remember we went through and enacted a complete redraft of the liquor code last year, and the related ordinances, including parklets and sidewalk cafes. And this was always part of the plan, come back and revisit it after we'd gone through a licensing season and tried this on, and I'm very happy to report very few problems. There were, most of the changes that you see here are actually the result of some needs for interpretation. In other words, calls came into Dovey's office, which then were referred to my office as to what does this provision mean. And we never really had a problem with it, but good code, you don't have those questions. It should be evident on its face. So that's most of the changes you see. There are, within the liquor ordinance, hopefully everybody's had a chance to look at that. I think the summary went around as well. Is that a couple of major additions, so a couple of pieces that we added there. One is delivery. I think that's the biggest change, and that's something which is going on. It's going on in the city now. It's not prohibited. So what the Liquor Commission wanted to do is sort of wrap our hands around this, figure out what the requirements are, because obviously you're going out into the wild. You're not on a licensed premises anymore. You're out delivering things to homes and the persons out there. So there's some very specific rules, and those are listed in the ordinance, and they're listed in the summary. But that comes up to delivery has to occur during sales hours, so you can't sell and then deliver an hour later. So you order at 2, but you get something at 3. So all those deliveries have to be confined to bar hours. Delivery is only by Bassett-trained employees who are 21 years old. The recipient has to actually receive the delivery. You can't just put it in the mailbox or something like that. And the licensee has to keep a record of that delivery. And there's sort of a safe harbor there where if you take a digital photo of the ID and just log that when and where that occurred, you're fine. And of course, common carriers like the Postal Service and UPS, FedEx, those are exempt. We can't regulate them anyway, and even if we did, that's not an issue. That's where somebody orders wine online and it comes in a month. These are more surrogate point of sales, so where you're calling in and saying, gee, we ran out of beer at the party, we need more. That's the concern.
And one thing I will point out, and Steve and I and Dovey have talked about it, so Walmart's doing the drive-up, and this also, even though because it's a drive-up, it's technically not on the premises, and it's covered by this as well, so.
And thanks, Manager Crowe, for bringing that up. It presents a hybrid situation. We have drive-throughs. We have drive-throughs licensed, but that's still a sale from the licensed premises. It's just through the wall. So you're still selling from a. Now, when you have a drive-up, you start getting into different criteria and different concerns, where somebody's walking out into their parking lot, where a car just drives up. So the election, and by the way, this is my language. That piece of it that Manager Crowe just raised has not gone through Liquor Commission. It will go back to Liquor Commission on Thursday, and we're going to review it. But I just wanted to make that clear for purposes of referring this forward. That piece of it is not a committee recommendation. But the suggestion is that effectively that record-keeping piece of it, where you take a digital photograph of the license and a logbook, that piece of it goes away. But other than that, the person serving it still has to be a Bassett-trained server. They still have to be 21 years old. The person who ordered it has to be present to take delivery. So it just sort of shortcuts that delivery process because we're requiring that a camera be in place so you can see who's taking delivery. Because of course, the concern with delivery is that does a delivery occur and an underage person receives that delivery. So that having the camera in the captive premises sort of allays that concern. The other larger addition is corkage. Now that's something that in most urban environments exists, and that's carry in. It's the opposite of carry out. It's carry in. Carry out, by the way, is allowed for wine too. There's a whole corking provision that deals with that, where you take out your doggy bag for the wine. If any of you have done that, but that's exactly what it looks like. They seal this thing up and send it home with you, and then you don't run into trouble with open seal. Corkage is actually where you carry a bottle of wine into a restaurant. Now, some providers will, or some licensees will be in favor of that. Some don't want that. So there's some specific language in here that says that it's at the option of the licensee entirely. There's no signage required to prohibit it. It's purely voluntary on the part of the licensee. The one thing that's not voluntary is they have to charge a $10 fee. So city doesn't get that. The licensee gets that. So that is just, I think, the city's way and the Liquor Commission's way of suggesting that there needs to be some sort of, our licensees need to make money too, and there will be some pressure out there for carry-in, so there's an upcharge of at least a certain amount. But that is if you're asked, that is not a tax. That's just a charge that the licensee charges and gets to keep.
Steve?
Yes.
Just a question, if you could, before you go further. Two things I see in that, and just because we went through a number of years ago trying to license a thing to bring your own BYOB type thing, bring your own bottle, okay? As I read this, two things that stick out to me, okay? There's a $10 fee required. Is that $10 a bottle, $10 a case, or $10 for 3 cases of wine I brought in?
It's a good question. And it's
Next slide.
And it's wine. It can't be hard liquor. It's got to be wine or champagne.
right.
Okay.
And it also states right there, Tom, you see it says 1 bottle.
Well, it's
Limited to one. Okay, excuse me. Other thing is, and maybe I'm wrong here or I haven't read it right. Does this have to be I see the food mentioned and this and that. Does it have to be a restaurant, or does it have to be a restaurant with a license?
It does not. It does not need to be a restaurant, but it needs to be served in combination with the service of a meal. So this was a discussion at Liquor Commission.
No, I understand. All I'm just trying to do is some clarity stuff, so somebody doesn't walk into McDonald's and say, here's my $10, I want to sit here and drink my wine. I mean, that's
it still has to be a licensed premises. So it still has to be a licensee. So that would take that scenario out. As originally drafted, when this went to Liquor Commission, it said it was only for Rs or LRs, licensees, restaurants.
Okay.
But then there was the discussion at Liquor Commission that you could run into a situation where maybe a Class A, we have very few of those actually, but maybe somebody that's a Class A or a W would want to have an event where they bring in food or something like that. There's nothing that really says they can't do that if they catered in or whatever. So the decision by the Liquor Commission was to leave that open, and I tend to agree with that. It's still, you can't just carry in your bottle of wine and sit there and drink it and walk back out. That's not what the intent is. Again, it's wine with dinner. So there is a requirement that it be consumed in connection with a meal. So that's somewhat self-policing and still leaves open the option for creative service.
Was there a discussion at all on anything with multiple bottles? The only reason I ask that is I use an example. When my daughter got married, they had a wine that they saw from Spain or this or that they really liked, so they wanted to provide that to the guests, you know. Now, at this rate, that'd be if you took a case, it'd cost you $120, you know.
Yes.
Just
That-
asking.
And that's not what this, so in that scenario, this is limited to 1 bottle per person over the age of 21. So if you have 4 in your party, you could theoretically bring in 4 bottles, but you'd pay $10 a bottle. Now, I know as a consumer, I'm probably paying a $10 markup anyway. So that really does, I don't think that that's a, but in the scenario that you're raising, Alderman Clem, I would say that at that point you contact the licensee and say, hey, can you
Sure.
can you serve this for us or whatever?
That's what was done at the time, but I just, you know.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
As I said, other than those couple of things, this is a small change to the ordinance, but sort of a shift in prior policy, is the Liquor Commission, I think in light of recent events over the last year or so, and the Liquor Commission feels that having surveillance cameras in each of the licensed premises makes sense at this point. You know, the cost of those systems has gone down so that it's not a huge burden for the licensee to maintain those. And the suggestion here is that all licensees by the end of 2019 will have those in place. New licensees, if you start immediately, then you have to have them in order to be licensed. But we're given a little bit of a phase-in for existing licensees.
Attorney Cox? Is the county also contemplating something of this nature?
Not to my knowledge,
Okay.
but they could be. I mean, I don't know.
Not to your knowledge, sure. Thanks. Please continue.
The placement of those, and Chief Barkalow will be happy to hear this, I believe I have a methodology that we can set this up so that it still meets the concerns of the department, but doesn't require Chief to go out to every licensed establishment and say, I want a camera here, here, and here, and here. It is left to the discretion of the department, but I think we can set up sort of a uniform set of concerns and roll that out to the licensees over the next year. But I thought I should call that out because it's a very small change to the ordinance, actually, but obviously has a significant impact. As I said, most of the rest of these, I'm happy to discuss any of the changes that you see, but most of the rest of them were fixes, just little tweaks to the language, some of them even editorial in nature, just because.
Steve, do you want to cover the T4?
Thank you. So we're still struggling with this, and I think I talked to Dovey about this today. We're still having some issues with trying to conform these temporary licenses because there's so many different possibilities that come up. So the T4 is designed to address a niche that we aren't meeting right now. So I call it our Fest license. So right now, if somebody comes into Beer Fest and they are use for example, a Galena Brewing, out-of-town brewer, craft brewer wants to come in, they make their own stuff and they sell package. If they come into town under our current ordinances, they have no choice but to either come in under somebody else's T1 or T2, if it would be a T1 in that case, because that's the charitable temporary, and FDDF pulled it, so it'd be GFP now would pull that license. But that prohibits them from selling any packaged liquor. If they wanted to do it themselves, they would have to pull a T3 and pay $250, which is cost prohibitive for a day. So we created a T4, which is $50 and also allows package sales. So what that allows us to do at Beer Fest or Wine Fest is each of these craft brewer or vintners can sell their own stuff there, and they can sell it from a booth. It has to be something they've manufactured. You can't have a retailer set up shop and just sell out of a booth at that. It has to be a manufacturer selling their own stuff. But It's the same for in-town and out-of-town. So Generations could also take advantage of that T4, pull a T4 for Brewfest and sell package at the booth. It was designed to meet that need and hopefully be priced at a level which makes some sense. Where our T3, we're going to talk on Thursday night. We've got pricing concerns about that, because one thing that we have to keep in mind is the state charges for all these T licenses as well. So even though we can price it to what we think is a reasonable price, you have to remember the state's charging another couple $100 on top of that. So thank you, Manager Crowe, for raising that, because that is the other addition. Again, the rest being mostly fixes and just tightening up the existing language to meet current practice. And then you've also got another ordinance, which is parklets and sidewalk cafes. That looks like a big shift. Well, it's really not. It's section 1026.17 is section 1026 generally is our sidewalk ordinance. It talks about you can't obstruct those, you can't put up sharp things, you can't do these things. And then we have this section 17, which is this big long section in the middle of sidewalks that talks about all the requirements for sidewalk cafes. On top of it, it didn't quite mesh with our parklets. Well, as you think about it, sidewalk cafes and parklets live in very close proximity to one another. You walk out of a licensed premises into a sidewalk cafe and then into a parklet. You know, and the example is Mort's had that set up last year. So you've got different regulations at the door, and then from the door to the parklet, and then at the parklet.
Even different licensing officers. So sidewalk cafes, I'm the licensing officer, and the parklet was the community development director.
And so from a streamlining standpoint, what I've done is I've taken it out of 1026.17, the sidewalk cafes, referred to section 1034, added a section in 1034 for sidewalk cafes, and combined all the requirements. So sidewalk cafes and parklets now have all the same requirements. They are still separate licenses because they do separate things, and you could have one without the other. But you can have a combined application, so it's just a matter of, it's a one-stop deal. They submit the application, and they either get a sidewalk or a parklet or both, same application. They pay 1 or 2 fees depending on what they want. And it's designed to really speed that process up, unify the requirements. We had music at one, you couldn't at the other. You could have liquor without food at one, you had to have food at the other, and it just didn't quite mesh. So putting them all in the same section just made sense. So as I said, there's a lot of changes there, but it's all intended to just sort of consolidate the requirements.
Attorney Cox, how do you anticipate enforcement of the actively prohibiting loitering change in the liquor code?
It gives us a tool that we don't have currently.
All right.
You know, I think that's something, our licensees are pretty good, you know, if shown a violation, if a violation has been addressed, most licensees will address that. And this gives us something to point to in the code that says, look, you have an active duty as a licensee to reach outside the boundaries of your wall, which, you know, normally as a business owner, you don't have that obligation. If something's going on at my sidewalk and at my office, I have no duty to do anything. However, a license, it's a privilege, not a right. So at that point, we do have a little bit of authority to require that licensee to take additional steps to try to disperse crowds and take measures to try to prevent that sort of thing right outside the door.
I like what you're trying to do. I was just curious as to how that's gonna play out, but thank you.
Where we've had some incidences, particularly in the downtown, where they'll buy from the local liquor stores and then loiter, get their pre-lube, as I would say, before they go into the
primed
bar.
up.
Before they go into the bar. Is a pretty, it's been a frustration for the police department.
Any further questions, comments?
Good
Or-
job.
This also, I assume, needs to be referred to the next council meeting?
So moved.
Moved by Alderman Clem and seconded by Alderman Parker to go to the next regularly scheduled city council meeting for deliberation. Any discussion? All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion carries. Thank you.
And this might be, just be a question, is that anything that you want to expedite? Considering we're in March, just asking, you know.
I think the parklet and sidewalk cafe, well, I don't know, depending on the snow clearance,
Yeah.
but.
Yeah.
I think they run 1st of May anyway.
Yeah, it's from the 1st of May to the end, first in April.
Thank you.
Okay, I believe the last item on the agenda is public comments. Tommy?
I want to tell Todd Barker that's a good job at that library. I want to know how that turned out, but.
Oh, very good, very good. Scams, schemes, and identity theft went very well.
And when I tell Sally Griffiths, she did a good job with Alderman.
Sally Brashaw.
Oh, Sally Bradshaw.
Thank you. We look a little different.
Any further public comments? Hearing none, seeing none, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Alderman Busker,
Second.
seconded by Alderperson Brashaw. Any discussion? All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
All right, meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Good job.
Alderperson Griswold. All right. Yeah, there's only 16 years of history. To that parcel.